So your work this week is firstly looking at life for women in Russia and the Soviet Union during the 1920s and 30s. And you can see in front of you on the screen there are four things that I would like you to do this week. One and two are asking you to get some notes down in your folders about how life for women changed during these years, and you are using pages 116 to 117 in your textbook to collect these notes. So that's pages 116 to 117. Item 3 is a very short exam practice question, an explain why question that I'll tell you about in a bit, which needs sending to me for marking and feedback once it's finished. And then finally, you just need to move on to getting a few notes down about how ethnic minorities were treated during the 1930s under Stalin's rule. So 4 items really, and what I'm going to do now is just go through some of the detail for 1 and 2 on this list. So we're going to start with looking at what life was like for Russian women after 1917. So we're going to go back a little bit to the Bolshevik takeover in 1917. And you'll probably remember one of the first things they did was to pass a decree which stated that women were equal to men. And there was this belief amongst the Bolsheviks, particularly Lenin, that they wanted women to be freed from their traditional role in the home. And you can see some of the changes here that they made. Things like divorce was made simpler. Abortion and contraception were made more available. There were educational opportunities given to women that they'd never had before. And there was equal pay for equal work too. So on the surface, one would be correct in saying that women's status and opportunities did improve when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917. Having said that, you also need to be aware that the Bolsheviks during this period did not always practice what they preached, and some of these things did not necessarily take off without a huge amount of effort. And as you'll see later, there is still a culture, a tradition, a belief that women's place is at the home during these years, is in the home during these years, and that even can be seen in the Bolshevik party too, that a lot of the men were quite resistant to this idea of women perhaps taking over their positions and their status. So largely positive changes for the freedom of women during these years, but you do need to be aware of the resistance to that change as well. So we're going to move on to 2 now, which is looking at what changed in regards to family life, employment and political position. And a lot of this is focusing on what changed under Stalin's rule in the late 1920s and into the 1930s. Because things did change for women under Stalin in these 3 particular areas. So if we start with family life, and there were problems here, by the time you got into the mid-late 1920s, the Soviet Union, Russia, had the highest divorce rate in Europe. And this had contributed towards broken homes, homeless children, children who lived on the streets begging and being involved in crime. And Stalin was wishing to change this and to re-establish the family again, to put it back in favour, and to crack down on divorce and abortion. So there was a big effort in the 1930s for Stalin to re-establish family life and to make changes for the life of women. So some of those items introduced by the Bolsheviks in the 1920s are reversed under Stalin in the 1930s. So under Stalin you get divorce and abortion made more difficult. For example, abortion was actually banned in 1936, and fees for divorces, the money it cost for a divorce, were greatly increased to reduce the amount of divorces during this period too. So we are talking about a period now where there are restrictions on women's freedoms in terms of abortion, contraception, divorce. And the reason for that is, again, Stalin's personal wishes to stop the destruction of family life, the broken homes, the homeless children, the youths involved in crime, the high divorce rates. He wanted to change that and improve things. Secondly, we move on to employment. And obviously the big aim of Stalin is industrialization. And in order to do that, he needs a huge workforce. And in order for that to happen, he needs a growing population, which feeds in, of course, to some of his policies about restrictions on abortion and contraception in the family life area we've just looked at. So there is a huge effort to get women into the workplace during this period. Lots of propaganda. Women are actually paid incentives if they have 6 children or more. They're paid money to have 6 children or more during this period. So women are expected to work full-time, and there is a huge increase in the number of female workers in towns. There were 3 million women working in towns in 1928. By the time you get to 1940, this has gone up to 13 million during this period, female workers in towns working. So huge encouragement to get women involved, to get them helping to achieve the 5-year plans, which meant that life remained very difficult for women during this period, because not only were they expected to work full time, but they were expected to bring up a family too. And although there was a little bit of help in the form of state nurseries and creches, and children did receive education and free healthcare during this period, it did mean that there was an increased burden on women during the 1930s because of this expectation of being a full-time worker and also being responsible for looking after children too, in that restored family life. One of the interesting things here is that though women did get jobs during this period, once again, they are not in managerial positions. There is still that ceiling, that glass ceiling that they're not allowed past. You are still talking about a male-dominated workforce during this period. So this brings us on to the third change. We've looked at family life changing under Stalin. We've looked at women's employment changing under Stalin. In terms of their political position, you're getting change too. If you go back to 1928, when Stalin comes into power, only about 13% of the members of the Bolshevik Communist Party, as it's called by then, are women. So still the Communist Party is a male-dominated party, with very few women rising up to those high positions in the party or in the government. Now, the Bolsheviks had founded a women's department in the Bolshevik Party, the Zenotdel, which is spelled Zhenotdel. And that was quite an outspoken body that was all about organising women and increasing their role in the party. The big change here is that it is abolished in 1930. Stalin gets rid of it in 1930 when the party is being reorganised under his leadership. And the rationale for that was him declaring that actually a lot of the issues that women had back under the Tsars had been solved by the Bolsheviks during the 1920s, and therefore there was no need for a women's department in the Communist Party anymore. So we're looking at a change here. We're looking at a reduction in the political position of women in the Communist Party during this period. And the reason for that is that the Communist Party was still overwhelmingly male-dominated. And Stalin, of course, still believed that men should be running the Communist Party. So in a way, this is going back on the idea of political equality that the Bolsheviks perhaps wanted to introduce back in 1917, but as you know, actually did not do a huge amount about it because only 13% of the party were women by 1928. So you've got 3 changes there in the 1930s. to family life, to women's employment, and to women's political position. Once you've had a go at that exam practice question and sent it to me for a bit of feedback, you then need to move on to task 2, which is just getting down some details and notes about ethnic minorities during this period. And then hopefully we are in a position where we've finished all the content on this course now, and we can start looking to just making sure that you guys are experts at answering interpretations questions, which we're going to focus on over the next 2 or 3 weeks before the end of term. Which brings us on to a practice question, which is pretty straightforward. As you can see on your screen, it's an explain why question, so we're looking for the usual 3 paragraphs, 12 marks. You're great at these by now, so this shouldn't be a problem. It's good practice for you. And you're looking at explaining why Stalin's government made changes to the position of the Soviet Union in the years 28 to 41. You can use political positions in the Communist Party, you can use family life. Chances are you're going to use employment too here. But remember to focus your answer on why these changes are taking place, not necessarily going on about what these changes were. This is an explain why question. It's about motive. It's about reasons why these changes are made.